You're a nice painting behind you. Okay. So we have like 10 people here or something. No, actually there's 18. Okay, I can't count. All right. I'm gonna record it. So if your teammates, I know who's here, I know who's not. If your teammates don't understand it, I know who didn't show, and like if they ask questions like, "Oh, I don't really get it," and I don't know, and I'll be like, "Okay, you didn't show up, and you didn't watch the video." So I'm gonna make sure that you guys or whoever can't make it, because it's Sunday, it's fine if you can't make it, but that if they didn't watch the video, that they need to watch the video before asking questions about this. Um, so let's start from beginning to end. So let's go to Travel Secure. So I'm gonna share my screen. And you guys are allowed to ask questions for this one too. So you guys can like not like unrelated, like, hey, how does MongoDB work? But like if while I'm going through it on a specific part you don't understand, just be like, yo, I still don't get that. Like, all right, cool, no worries. So let's go to so Travel Secure is an application that I created that's honestly like super, super simplified version of what I wanted to build. But it has just enough features to have all the things that you could use when you guys are building your applications, including authentication, models, relational models, meaning that they data is related to one another. It has handlebars templating. It is using SQLize, and it is using MVC in the way that I want you guys to use it. So why don't we start from beginning to end? So I'm going to go to the live application. So you guys all know what this is. And last time it was funny because people were asking, I was like, where is this at? And I'm like, well, here's the URL. And they were like, wait, so how do you get there? I'm like, well, I don't know how else to explain it. It's right here. It's github.com/OSP123/travel secure. So hopefully you guys understand how the internet works at this point. That's pretty much it. If you just go to my GitHub, then that's how you get there. I don't know if Idir, I think maybe was just trolling me last time. So let's start off with how this application works. Some of this stuff might be outdated. I'm not sure. Idir, oh yeah, yeah. What is a troll? A mythic creature? So why don't I decrease the size? I want to go to 100%. So when you go to this application on production, notice that it's hosted on Heroku. To get to this page, when I go to the domain, I go to my application. I say, how does that page load up? So the first file that I look at is my package JSON, and my package JSON has something called scripts. And the thing that I'm starting on is the start script. So hopefully at this point, everyone has already watched. I'm going to assume that you guys already watched the MVC video from Travel Secure from last Sunday. So if you haven't, then you're going to be missing out a lot. And you guys should definitely watch that before watching this. Last time we went over it, what does this script start over here? When you execute this, how do you execute this script over here? What did we go over in the last video?
It's basically npm start.
Mm-hmm. So npm start allows you to run this script. And npm is one way of running scripts. Another one is yarn. We're using npm in this case. And what this does is this allows you to execute your files in a really easy way by just mentioning the name of the script. I mean, like it could have a bunch of things happening, but and a bunch of commands. But you just say npm in the name of whatever you want to call the script, and it'll execute it. So this is also what, by default, what Heroku looks for. So if you're trying to, let's say, host something on Heroku, the first launching point that Heroku uses is what you've declared as your start. So this start script should exist and should be how your application begins, right? So Joby, you did a good job on that. Where is this file over here? How do I access it?
From your root directory cd into bin.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so perfect. So Joby mentioned correctly that from my root directory, and that's because my package JSON, it mentions over here, it says node dot, meaning like where I currently am at, which is in my root, package JSON is in my root directory, go to bin, and then it will go to this www file. Now this is generated using Express Generator, which is why it's starting from this www file. So this is using the Express CLI to generate this application, just making it easier to start off with. Like it gives you a bunch of stuff to start off with. So it made it easier for me to just like create an application, right? So this is the way they set it up. You don't have to, you can start it from server.js, but I started from www. So I wanted to actually do this on purpose to show you like different ways of approaching it. So over here, there's a debugger that runs using Express example. So you can actually take this out. You don't really need this one. The next thing that happens is we have our app that gets called over here. So required, meaning it gets imported. Now, this server file is being required from where? What do these two dots mean? Definitely not models. Yeah, so this goes one folder above, yeah, exactly. Two dots means up one directory. And then what does this mean over here? Yeah, server.js, exactly. So let's go up one directory. So instead of being in bin, now we're at travel secure, right? So then it said to go into server.js file. Now again, you don't have to list .js because all of Node is JS files unless explicitly stated otherwise. Makes it a little bit easier. So now I included a whole bunch of shit, right? I included Express, Path, Morgan, Body Parser, Express Session. Some of the stuff I am going to cover now. So we will be using Morgan, Path. Body Parser is actually outdated. You don't need Body Parser anymore. Express takes care of this for you. Before you needed Body Parser as what is it? External middleware in order to handle information coming into Express as part of the body, but now Express handles it through itself. So you don't need this anymore. I also have Passport. Passport makes it easier to scale your authentication across multiple authentication platforms, meaning like if you're using like Facebook authentication or custom authentication or like Google authentication, any of that, Passport makes it easy to just set that up. It's not that easy, but it's just like, it's one way of doing it that's like essentially standardized. I also have some configuration files that I modularized as well. And we'll take a look at that in a bit. And next, what we have over here is our instantiation of our Express application. So this shows that we're saying, okay, instantiate Express and start using it. Oh, I stopped using sessions. I don't want to use sessions right now, so I got rid of that. All of this, what is all this setting up? What is lines 20 through 27 setting up? Booty McTootie. Now, Booty McTootie's up ahead that I commented out. Yeah, handlebars, right? Setting up the layout. Yeah, the default engine. And what do we mean by our default engine? Like Thomas the Tank, or what kind of engine is it? Yeah. Oh, so Steven actually mentioned it's a template engine. So this is going to be our rendering engine. Yeah. So this is our rendering engine is what we're using to pass data into in order to display information as HTML back to the client. So this all gets sent back to the client, and then it renders it through the handlebars rendering engine. All right. So next. You do not have to use handlebars for project 2. You can use You do have to use a rendering engine, so you do have to use like something similar, like Jade, Pug, whatever. I don't even know, like some of those other ones that exist. You don't have to use React, but if you guys want to go bananas and use React, go ahead. So any of those would be fine. Like if you guys, I would recommend just getting used to a server-side templating engine, because that is something that's still used a lot. And so I want you guys to get used to it. And people are like, no, it's not really used in the industry anymore. It's like, yeah, big tech companies don't use that anymore, but there's most tech companies would still use it that way. So if you're not going to like the top 10 companies or something, that's like all the other companies are still using like server-side templating. And there's a decent amount that like are switching over now too. But even just getting the understanding of like how they used to do it and transitioning, you could be the person that transitions from server-side templating and puts it into like React or Angular or any of that stuff. So I would still understand like what the concept is and how to implement it. I also have some stuff that I did over here. This is for authentication checks. So this is further modularization just to have authentication checks. And what I do is this checks their authentication status of when a request is made. And if they're authenticated, then they're able to go to the next parts of the application. Otherwise, it says like, okay, well, it reroutes back to their client. We're also going to use Logger. So Logger, I think, is part of Morgan. Yeah. So we're using Morgan, and all it does is display all these server-side connections, and every time like a request is made and a response is sent, it just logs that information to the console. It's really cool. It's definitely not for hackers. Although it can be used for hackers, but it's mostly something that we use to understand what's happening every time we make requests and stuff on our terminal when we're working on our local machine. Body parser, again, this is deprecated, so now we just use express.json and express.url encoded, but you can see that it's very similar. We're also using express.static. So do you guys remember what express.static does? What does express.static do? Yeah, serve static files. So what are static files? And how do I retrieve static files? It's a file that doesn't change. Yeah, HTML, CSS, client-side JavaScript, right? Yeah, so no processing or rendering required. You just have your public files to display immediately as soon as you ask for them. Exactly. Static files, the benefit is that you don't need to, it decreases latency, and it makes it so you don't have to have routes set up. So it decreases the amount of code that you need in order to retrieve those files. It and increases the speed at which those files are sent back. And they're always going to be a GET request. A static file, again, it's not ever going to be dynamic. Yeah. So it's never going to be a post, right? A static file by default is always going to be a GET request. Can you name an example of web app that would make sense to leave static? I mean, there's always going to be a web application that's going to have some static files inside, probably. But a web, I mean, like any basic site is all going to be static, right? Like a dentist site or something like that. So that you don't even have to set up a server. It would just be like creating something, I don't know, like our initial applications where we just hosted our applications on like a pure static server, right? So if the question is like, what would be examples of a static application? Basically anything we built like from weeks 1 through 6 were all like static applications, nothing with the server. And you can just post to GitHub pages. If you want anything that requires a server and rendering and stuff like that, then that requires the usage of a server. So our application is a hybrid where it's all server side, and then we can also have static rendering or serving static files when we need to, because it makes it a lot better. Yeah, so this is a dynamic app that we're building that would make sense to leave something static within the app. So anytime you're retrieving any kind of client files like HTML, CSS, like client-side JavaScript, that's all static files, right? So if you take a look over here, and we're going to get to it actually. So when I get to the handlebars part, I'll show you guys how the handlebars part works. So let's go to those parts when we get to it. So again, like I want the questions to be about like if you're getting confused about here, not like what we're about to cover. Because Omar, I think you get ambitious about like what's in the future and stuff like that. But like we're gonna cover that pretty soon anyway. So I mean that's gonna be in like 10 minutes or something. Your question's gonna be answered. So if you guys are getting confused about anything like previously that I'm mentioning, then ask questions about that rather than like something I'm about to like cover in like 10 minutes. So now I'm going to do require routes app, and I'm passing the app inside of the routes. So this app refers to our Express instantiation, right? So that means I'm passing in the Express instance to my routes. Now, the reason for that is because everything has already gone through my app already, and I want to continue using that app, meaning all my my passport check, my auth check, and everything that's tied to that app. I want to then pass that into routes. So my request is going to get passed into that as well. So why don't I go to my routes? So I go to routes.js. And now this routes.js, like we mentioned in the previous video, so those were here for the previous video. What does this mean? What is this routes.js for? This is close to controller, but it's not controllers yet. Almost. Yeah. So what is this file used for? Yes, it's for modularizing the routing files. Exactly. So this is so Lynn got this one correct, which is this file is used to modularize how to route to different routes. And that sounds kind of like redundant, but the reason that we're doing this is because we are going to scale our routing files, right? So think about all of the routes that you're going to have in your application. If you have all your routes over here, your routes are going to start getting really, really complex, right? It's not going to scale well. If you put all your routes inside of here into one file or something, it's not going to work well. So instead what we do is we say, okay, for anything that's trips, go to the trips routing. For anything that's pricing, go to pricing routing. For anything that's users, go to users routing. For route, go to routes for that application. Now, what also does is it, like a little small benefit is this already gets prepended to this specific route file when going into these route files. So why don't we take a look at these route files? Okay. So for example, we're specifically looking at you make a GET request to the root of your application, right? So we're making a GET request to this, right? So when we do that, what you want to do is you're making a GET request and you're saying, okay, well, this matches this root route. So what we're going to use is this application, right? So this is still middleware, so it's being hit first. So we're going to say, go to this application. This application is going to this file called applications.js. So how do I go to this routes application.js according to what it says over here? So yeah, so our folder is in our travel secure route, right? So this tells us go to the root route. So at the main route, then go to routes, and then go to application.js. Correct. So we go here, and now we passed app into here, right? So now I'm using an instantiation of Express. Now, I don't remember why I actually instantiated Express over here, because I think I could have used app.express, unless I didn't pass in, oh no, I didn't pass an app into here. So I think that was my mistake. Could I do that? I might refactor it. I mean, that's fine. So what we're going to do is we're just going to use router. So router is just a part of Express. And all we're doing is using the routing aspect of it now. So it makes it more semantic. And we don't have to use the entire object that is the Express instance if all we're doing is running routing. So it makes it a little bit faster. So we do this. We say, now this is the part where Lewis is mentioning where we're going to our controller, right? So this is where we handle our actual routing, right? So before we were just modularizing our routes, like Lynn mentioned, but now we're doing our routing, and now routes are going to tell us which controller to go to, right? Based on the route that we are at. So now we know that, okay, we're on everything that matches anything at the root location, any HTTP method for the root location. So right now we only have one HTTP method. Which is the only HTTP method that we're trying to match for at this point?
Get.
Yeah, get, exactly. So we say router.get, and again, it matches this path as well. And then what we say is application controller.index. Now, what is this second argument referring to? The controller file, right? So this is the application controller file. And what is this .index? Yeah, the index is the exports and controller. So it refers to the specific method that's being executed, right? So this is just a function call. Because remember, before we had our callback function directly inside of our route. And now what we're doing is we're saying, okay, call this method from somewhere else. So modularizing it into this application controller. So now we have our first part of our MVC model, where our controller is handling the logic, right? This is just routing. This is logic. So actual application logic is being handled over here in .index. So why don't we take a look at it? So again, how do I get to here? How do I get to application controller.index? Folder up. Yep. So we go out of routes and enter travel secure, and then we go into controllers. So we go into application controller. And then over here, it says exports.index. So index is a method off of the exports object that we're exporting. And all it is a function, right? So this function is doing res.render. And what is it rendering? Yes. So the index refers to index.handlebars. Exactly. So the index.handlebars file. So if we take a look at this index.handlebars file is going to exist in which directory? Well, all of our handlebars files are under what? Views. Yes, these are all views, and this is a good concept to understand. It's like we have this MVC model, right? So now we have controller, and controllers they can do a few things. They can do everything. They basically control what you're going to do next, right? They control your logic. They're logic controllers. So they say, hey, okay, we got this information. Now this person gave us this information, this client, and whatever it is, get, post, put, delete, whatever it is, right? What do I do with it next? And that's what the controller determines. In this case, they're saying, okay, controller, I'm going to render just the index page. Okay, cool. Let's do that. So it does res.render. And are we passing any data to this index.handlebars file? Nope, we're not passing any data to it, right? Would you use rec with a get request? You do not need to use rec right now, so this is useless at this point. You could use rec.params. Yeah, you could use rec with a get request, yeah. If you're making a rec call, yeah. Like you can use rec.params, rec. Yeah, you could. Okay, so we go to index.handlebars. So this index.handlebars is a giant cluster file. Now it's not that great because I'm using like what's it called? Bootstrap. At work, we're starting to use like something called Carbon components from IBM, and then like we use some other stuff too. I don't really care. Not a design person, so I don't really give a shit. But if you guys are interested in like newer stuff, there's some newer stuff out there like Carbon components and all that stuff. I care more about like the engineering aspects of it though. But if you guys are interested in like different like design assets, Carbon components does look better and all that stuff. So yes, views are what gets sent to the front end. They're just what's going to be displayed to the client. So in this case, this gets information being passed into it if you decide to pass information. We're also going to render some information into it as well. So these are what are called handlebars partials. So these are partials, meaning that they're partial templates. And the way that you tell these are partial templates is they have this little arrow, just specific for handlebars, right? Don't worry about how it works in like other places. Just in the handlebars, it just happens to be the syntax. The concept of partials exists across a lot of applications. Like Rails definitely has it. I think Django has it. I think Django has it. Yeah, like other applications for sure have it. So if we go to partials, they just exist under partials, and these are like bits and pieces like that are like components that you reuse as templates into other templates. So this is alluding a little bit to how React works and how you can do better templating. So for example, nav is definitely going to be a partial because that's something that you would include in a lot of different pages. So this is just some handlebars file that you can include in other handlebars files. And the way that you do it is just name it whatever you want. And then you can just use it by calling the partial name. And that'll include, and it'll look for the specific nav.handlebars file, and it'll just import it in there. So simple enough. Another one that I have in here is login modal. So I include the login modal in this one too. And all this index.handlebars also goes into the layout. Now our default layout is listed as main.handlebars. And that again is in our server.js. Where the hell is it? It's up here somewhere. Here we go. Default layout main. So our main.handlebars over here. And that is where this index is passing information directly into this body tag. This body tag is very specific to just handlebars. So it just means, hey, all your template information that you want to render into this layout gets passed in here. You can have all your other metadata right here, right? Meaning like all your other links, right? And these links are really good for if you want to use static assets, right? So you have all this information packaged up and sent back and rendered. So when it renders, what happens is all this information gets processed and then it gets converted to HTML, CSS, JavaScript, gets sent to the client, right? So whatever the client requestee is, it's going to get sent back in a format that your browser will understand. So then your browser loads the application from top to bottom. So it's going to load all this information, and then it's going to load this. So it's going to load, it's going to make a request as bootstrap.css, import that. It's going to make a request as min.css, import that. The CSS file over here, this is making a request to your server for this. It's a static asset, looks for it, and then finds it. How do I, what's the path to find this file? How do I get to this file? Assets, CSS, grayscale.css. Well, where is assets located inside of? Well, it looks like it's root, but it's not really root, right? It's in public, correct. So it's a static file, right? So that means all of our static files exist inside of public, right? So public is going to be where all of our static assets lie. And again, we mentioned that when we use express.static. So we go to public, assets, CSS, and we have grayscale.css. It doesn't need the path because we're using a loader for that. So express.static is also, not only is it middleware, it's middleware that's also a loader, meaning that whenever any path comes, well, I guess the middleware acts as a loader in itself. So when you're using middleware with Node, what happens is it says, okay, go to this path. And so it just prepends it with the path of public. So each of these files are inside public already prepended with the path. So it's pretty much the same thing. Okay, so now I want you guys to explain that to each other real quick from beginning to end, because hopefully you guys, this is a second iteration through this part, and then I'm going to go through some more advanced stuff. So I'll give you guys about, let's see, about 10 minutes to discuss with each other. I wish I could do breakout rooms. There might be too many people to explain this to one another. But if you guys have your groups available right now, maybe work in your groups real quick to just explain like the process I just mentioned of how to get this page right here, because this is super important. Just how to get this GET request so that this appears. So if your group members are available, explain this to each other. If your group members are not available, try to explain it to yourself, okay? You definitely don't start in the models folder. All right, I'm gonna come back in 10 minutes. Oh my God, Christine, you are so distracting. So Jovi, continue. Oh my God. I'm glad that you guys are bouncing off each other. That's good. So Jovi, you did a really good job explaining that part. So did Omar. Let's see. Christine, you did it well. Yeah, Steven as well. So keep going. Yes, it is. I live in a very fancy household. So after you get past the package JSON, you go to the bin www file. Then you go to the server.js file. Keep going. Continue the narrative. And use travel secure as a reference. Mm-hmm. Boy, oh boy. Yep. Set the default templating engine to handlebars. And after that's set, come on, y'all, keep going. The grandfather clock does not matter. You guys need to get this. Yep. So you have all the middleware. And after the middleware, where do we go to? Yep. Then we go to routes. Excellent. Let's also get some other people to start getting into this. So Adimachi, so that's Alicia, I think. Angel's on here too. Huh. Oh, Angel Aquas. That's not the TA Angel. Let's get Angel, Edir, Herman, Hadi, Jake. Well, all of it's modularized. So you don't say modularized in the app. You're saying that so Hadi, just message on here. Everyone's just continuing with this explanation of how the application is working. So you guys are just trying to explain how this is working together. So as the logic flow of this application is being broken down, I'm gonna correct you guys as you guys give responses. Michelle, I haven't heard anything from you. Tallulah, I want some responses. Ted, Tristan, Vaibhav, I've heard a little bit, so maybe just chime in a little bit. So far we're at the routes. So at the routes file, Stephen mentioned what happens at the routes file. I mean, Shannon's not wrong about modularization, but it's a little bit too vague. I want to explain it a little bit better. So Shannon, not yet. When we get to the routes file, what happens? At routes, the rendering engine is not defined, no. So go to the routes file. The routes modularize, they modularize into other routes, right? So they go and they modularize into, so Lewis has this, it's into other subroutes, right? So we go to our routes. So, and Omar, you missed the subroutes. Otherwise it's almost there. But I want it explained in this way via text. So, well, you guys are skipping the modularizing in the routes. You guys are going directly into controllers. So in routes file, yes. Now you go to each route that we want to go to, correct? And then the default route calls application controller index, correct? So now we go to so this routes file matches our routes folder that we want to go to, which is for the route that we want to get to. From the route, so Angel mentioned correctly, the default route calls the application controller.index in this case. So when we go to our routes file instead of our routes folder, after we go from our routes root file, it's basically that routing file is just taking care of our routing, right? So when we go to the routing file, then it's going to call the application controller.index. Now, what does the application controller.index do? And actually, more importantly, what is the purpose of actually separating out our routes from our routes file? Why do we have a routes.js and multiple routes folders? So it can scale, but what does it mean to scale? Like what? How does that help it scale? It's correct. It is modular and is correct, and it does help it scale. But what is this modularization? What is this like? I don't want to just use buzzwords, right? Like, scale the larger, more complex program by, so when we do this, as opposed to us doing what? Yes, correct. So it prevents us overprocessing from a single file, correct. So if we have it in the single file, then that makes it a lot slower. It doesn't help us reduce our ability to read from it. It would just put all of our routes in one file and it just makes it really overly complex and unable to understand what's happening, right? So we're improving our workflow that way. So good. I'm glad that you guys are understanding that, because that is much more important than like what it is or how we're doing it. So why don't we now get to our controller? So Angel mentioned, a lot of you guys actually mentioned the controller. So we're now at our application controller.index. So visualizing this and going to the file, like you guys are allowed to look at the GitHub. Our application controller.index is just executing what? Yeah, it's executing logic, right? In this case, what specific logic is it executing? It is rendering the index.handlebar file, correct. So it executes the function and then it runs the rendering for index.handlebar file. Now, where is the index.handlebar file? And what does it mean to render the handlebar file? Yeah, So it's in the views folder. And what does it mean to render this file from the views folder? It's basically saying like display this information, but process it essentially. Rendering means processing. So it fills in the data in the curly bracket. Yeah, exactly. And makes it into an HTML file. And then because your browser can't handle handlebars, right? So handlebars is just something that is a rendering engine, takes the information, processes it, fills it with data, and then displays it. So that's correct. You guys have a correct explanation over here. Okay, so now we finally have this application. Now we also have what Omar mentioned, which is the partials as well, right? What are the partial files? What are the partial templates that we're using? Yeah, for reusable components that we're going to be using multiple times, right? So these are template components that we're going to be using over and over. And this is something that I want you guys to really understand, because we're going to be using that when we get to React a lot more. And it's going to be the fundamental aspect of how we use React and why we use React as well. Or at least one of the main aspects of it. All right. And all that gets filled into a layout file as well, because it all gets passed into our body, right? Our triple handle, our triple mustache. So it finally gets sent as HTML to the client, and we see something like this, right? All right, so now why don't we get to some other types of requests? So now I'm gonna go to login. Now this is gonna be something that's a little bit more complicated. And we went over this last time, so I'm gonna click on this register button. So now I'm at register. And this, how did I get to register? So we went over this last time. How did I get to this page, this user/signup? How did this get rendered? Now, basically, you guys understand this, like about how to get this information, all that. How did I get this? Yeah, it's a GET request, right? So I made a GET request. That button register went to user/signup, and the route for users and was hit. So if we go through our application, a request was made. It goes. We check our package JSON. It's like, oh, okay, it went through bin www. Then it went to server.js. Then the request got passed. Went through routes. Okay. Oh wait, routes file. The request was for the route, or sorry, users. So anything under users. So it's this one. So which of these routes gets accessed? Which of these files do we go to? Correct. So we go to routes/users, right? So this is the users file. So why don't we go to the users file? Routes, users. Cool. So now we're over here. So out of these routes, which route do we hit? So I think Arman meant, he meant one of these, right? But which of these, there's several routes over here, right? Correct. We go to this route, right? So Christine, that's what you're talking about is the action. We don't want to go to action yet. We're just going to the route. So yes, this is the route that we want to go to. All right, so this route is the one that we hit because it matches those two parameters, right? User/signup. And this is, again, prepended with users already. And now we're going to execute this action. So this is the callback function. Now, how do we get to this users controller.registration page? Yes, whenever you make a request, it has to match these two things, the HTTP method and this path. So now, so what is this? Yeah, line 5. So Veva mentioned line 5. So how do we get to that? Yep, directory up. And then we go into controllers. And now we go into users controller. So now it's this sign up user. Is that the one we want though? Which action matches it? Which of these are we going to? I feel like on one of those like kid shows, like Blue's Clues. Like, where's the clue? Yeah, registration page. There we go. There's the clue. So registration page. So now we have this function being defined, and then this, yeah, it's not 24, but it's this one over here. So we have registration page is the one that we're calling, right? And this does res.render, but renders something different this time, right? With a different layout as well. So we mentioned this last time. What is the layout being sent in this case? In this case, we're sending a different layout. What is the layout? Yeah, this is the main registration dot handlebars layout. So we're explicitly stating a different layout than the default layout. And what is the file that we're sending? Yes, so it's the registration file under users, right? So why don't we take a look at both of those? So those are all handled. Where are all of our views located in? The views folder, right? So if I go to layouts, I see the main registration. And it's a little bit different. It has a little bit different code. It has sign up files and stuff like that. Some of the stuff might remain the same, but some of it's different. So I had a different layout for that. Not ideal, but you know, it's just how layouts work. So we have our users / registration .handlebars. And this is also using a partial. What is the partial that we're using in this case? Nav, right? So we're including this nav partial. And then it just executes this. And yes, I could modularize this further, but I got lazy and I was like, oh, I don't want to do this. So you guys could modularize this further if you wanted to, but I think this is fine. Okay, so now we get this information displayed over here. So a partial is just a partial template. So if we take a look at partial templates, this is the C++. It's the handlebars. Here, here's the handlebars explanation. So you want to separate it because they're essentially like normal handlebar templates that may call directly by other templates. Basically, they're smaller templates that you use as components into other applications. So you modularize it because you're going to have reusability, right? You're going to incorporate it into multiple other templates, like a navigation menu or a footer or header. Yo, dog. It's a template within a template. All right, so I go back to register. And I have some stuff over here. So what is this? What concept is this? Well, why is there red and green changing? Yes, that's called data validation, right? Now this is this secure validation? No, why is it not secure validation? Yeah, I can just change anything on the client side, right? Anything that's public, I can change and is not secure. What the fuck is going on with my Mac? I fucking hate the new Mac. So sensitive, Jesus Christ. All right. So if I type anything in, it does some client-side validation, which I wrote some logic for. This logic is all on the client side. That means I have some client-side JavaScript that I've sent alongside of it. How do I tell where this client-side JavaScript is located if I have access to the GitHub repo? It's in the public, right? So I can just go to the file that I sent back. Now all my metadata is being sent as part of my layout, right? So I take a look at my layout and I say, okay, what JavaScript did I send back? Okay, I sent back this signup.js. What is Grayscale.js? I think it's probably gonna mean the signup.js. Why don't I go to the signup.js? So I go to public, I go to assets, go to JavaScript. Oh, go to signup.js, here we go. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Yeah, we see a bunch of stuff. That's event listeners for different fields. And I also have something that exists that makes a call. It's a post call to user/signup. So if I put this information to here and I hit register button, what happens is it makes this user sign up post. Now, this actually goes through what's called Passport. And this is something that we haven't gone into yet and we're going to get into now. I'm going to go briefly into it because I think I have another video on how I did Passport. So you guys can take a look at that on YouTube. But I'm gonna definitely go into it. So this you guys have done like several times now. And what happens is when I click on the button for sign up user, so this is the sign up button. On click, it takes the information, trims it, and then what it's doing is I'm going to execute this sign up user. It takes in the username, email, and password, and then I'm sending a post request to this location. So when I make a post request to this location, I'm passing in an object that contains the username, email, and password. So again, on the GitHub, how would I know what's handling that? What is handling it when I make a post request from register, meaning that when I put in my data in here, when I want to create a new user, what is handling that? What is handling my post request? It is the routes, but which route? So let's go back to the beginning. Where do I start with? Yeah, it is the user's post signup route. So if I went to it, so the first thing again, we go to bin www, then it goes to server.js, and then it's going to go to routes, and then it's going to go to the appropriate route. So first, we already know like most of the process. So why don't we just go to routes? So what's handling this post route, which is the post to user/signup? How do I get to, what's handling user/signup? Which of these routes is going to go to it? Yeah, routes/users, right? Exactly. So if we go to line 4, so now I go to users, and in here, which route is handling that request? On which line? Yep, it's 14. And why is it 14? What two things does it match? Yep, the path and the HTTP method. Yep, exactly. So these two things match, right? So after it matches that, there's a callback function. The callback function is being called into the controller. Now, this callback function, because it's a method of this controller, it's called the action. What action are you going to perform? So users controller dot sign up user. So I now go to my controller. So users controller is over here. Now, one thing before all that is we're requiring Passport, and I'm also requiring this is authenticated. Now, I'm not going to log in right now, so we're not using that Passport to authenticate. But this is going to use Passport when I generate a new user. I think. Let me double think this. Actually, let me double check that. So when I go Passport, blah 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 blah. I did this so long ago. Give me a second. Config Passport use. Oh, okay. I don't even have to use this. Yeah, that's only when I need to log in then. That's fine. Okay. So then what happens is it goes to the controller. I go to the user's controller. And I go to sign up user. So when I sign up a new user, this information is used to create a new user. Now, you guys should be used to the syntax at this point, right? I mean, you guys just started using it, but now we're using, what syntax is this? What is this using? Sequelize, right? So this is all Sequelize. So remember, when we're using Sequelize CLI, all we do is use this db equals require models. Now, why do we use this db equals require models? Why can't we? Why is this easier for us? Why do we not have to call the individual models? Yes, exactly. This allows us to use all the models. So it all gets passed into a single object called the under the variable db. I wouldn't say both the algorithm and index file. The models folder, when you go to it, if you just refer to the folder, it will refer to the index.js file. If you're referring to the index.js file, which is at the root of the folder, it will execute that folder, which then executes the algorithm, and then that so that algorithm is in the index file, and that executes, and that basically does the algorithm, which takes all the information from all the different models and puts it into a single object, right? So you have access to all those inside of DB now, right? So all my models, I can just do db.user. So if I do db.user.findAll, and then I can say, okay, now what's happening over here is I'm saying dbuser.findAll, where username is rec.body.username, because I have that information being passed to me from the client side, right? I'm making a request, so I pass that information to the body. And I now have the username, and I say, okay, cool. I made a request, and I want to find that user. If the user exists, I'm going to send back an object that says duplicate user equals true, and then it's going to be like, sorry, that user already existed, because on the client side, I have some logic that takes care of this. That says on the client side, if duplicate user is equal to true, then display a message that says, oh, sorry, that you can't do this because that username already exists. So you have to choose a different username. However, if that doesn't exist, then what we're going to do is we're going to create that user, right? So I'm going to do db.user.create. And then from there, this db.user.create is, again, just Sequelize. So this goes through and generates. And again, what kind of CRUD operation is create? No tricksings. Exactly, create, right? It would be so funny if someone just said destroy. It'd probably be a deer just to fuck with me. So we have all this smrt. So we have db.user.create, and then from there, we have this promise that's being returned, and then we say res.send redirect. Now, if there's an error, we're going to catch that error. Otherwise, we're most of the time just going to do this. Now, this redirect is being used by our client side to refresh. So this is just an object we're sending back with a property, and I'm using this on the client side to handle it. So where do I want to see how this is being handled, or where this is being handled? Where would I see that? Yeah, it's in the static.js file. Exactly. So to see where this is being handled, again, because we're sending this back. So make sure you guys really think about this before responding, because this is all being sent back to the client, right? So the client is the one that made the request. Now this is the one being handled. So can I make the screen bigger like that? Is that good? I didn't know you guys couldn't see. Sorry. Can you guys see now? Cool. All right. So now I go back to the, so Herman was correct. He said on the static.js file. So which static.js file? If I go to, let's go to the same application. Let's just open up 2 different tabs for it. So all of our static files are in here, right? And we know for a registration page, we sent back the view. That's layouts, that's main registration. So you know it's a sign up page or the sign up JavaScript file. So why don't we take a look at this sign up JavaScript file? Because that was the one that was executing our call, right? And this is just, what is this using? What library are we using that uses this Bling operator? Yeah, jQuery, right? You guys all know about jQuery because my homie been hanging out. So now, what does this promise over here mean? How is this related to this? Or this? That's where the data that gets returned is being handled, right? So not where the data gets returned, but this is where when the data gets returned, this is where the information gets handled by the client. All right. So our client is, again, just our client event listener is just like, there's a callback function. It's like, it's a promise. It's waiting for it. It's like, oh, shit, came back. Dope. All right. So if there's a duplicate user, then we say, okay, sorry, that username's been taken. Don't use an alert. Again, I was just being lazy here because I didn't care. And so you want to definitely do like a modal, but because I don't like front end shit, like I just didn't display a modal. But otherwise, if there is no modal, then I switch the location of my my window location, which is my URL, and I say, okay, instead of being at wherever I am, redirect to the path that was sent back. So I handled it using this. So instead, my window.location is being sent to root, which is just the root of my location. So it's just gonna, instead of it going to wherever I was, it's gonna go back to the domain. So instead of it being at user/signup, it's just gonna go here, right? So it's gonna go to root, it's gonna go here. So now we're registered. Now, another thing I did because I'm lazy is, and you guys can refactor this application if you want to make it like nicer and less lazy. Is that I didn't make it so my session is still logged in. So what I could have done is when I register, I could have like the session start on the back end, but I just didn't program it. So instead, it's, even though you registered, you're still not logged in. In order to log in, I have to go here. So now, before I get into that part, I want you guys to explain the process of registration to each other, because this part is important. And oh, there's one thing that I missed. I used a model, but I didn't even go through the model. Why don't we go through the model? Sorry about that. We used the model and we didn't even look at it. Where's a fancy pants model? User. So can we take a break for 5 minutes? Yeah, all right. Yeah, take a break for 5 minutes, go through this model and explain to each other how the registration works. This session is 2 hours, I told you guys. Hey, I don't want to do this, but I'm trying to help you guys out. I mean, I could just say, I'm just going to keep hanging out with my friends. I kicked them out at 8 because you guys need to learn this shit and I want you guys to get jobs. My students are stallions. I need you guys to be stallions. All right. So go take a go look through this. Take like a 5-minute break. And then I want you guys to discuss this with each other. I'm not gonna Yeah, you guys can go over the abstract nature of these different paintings over here because I have no idea. My roommate and the landlord, who is the landlord, he actually volunteers at the Getty and knows about this kind of shit. I'm just simply. Good. How about you? Oh, okay. No worries. I'm going through all of these. I don't understand. Jesus Christ. I'm glad that you guys had some intelligent conversations along the way. Okay. So getting back to it. So, yeah, so the modal. Right. So now that you guys took a little break away from that, see if you guys can explain to each other how the not the get request, but the post request works, both from the client from the very beginning using the data validations, and then using the AJAX call all the way to the server, and then the information going to the controller, then going to the model, and then returning that information back to the controller to the client. Oh God, what are you guys writing? Jesus Christ. Christine, you're so distracting. Let's focus. Yep. Yeah, so the signup.js is the one executing. Mm-hmm. So let's go. Otherwise, I'm going to start picking on people, actually. So I'm going to start saying, so Hadi is correct. You start off with the signup .js that gets sent back, because we already know that we're over here. And we're now making a request by putting in this information. And let's just say I click on this register button. And now this might be a question from an employer. What happens next? Describe to me what happens next. Hadi mentioned that the signup.js is the one that handles the request, because there's an event listener on the register button. Mm-hmm. Yep. So it goes to the user signup route, correct? After it goes to the user signup route, what happens next? Yep, goes to the user's controller. And which action does it follow? Yes, correct. It goes to the signup user method. After it goes to the signup user method, what happens next? What's inside of the signup user method? Again, you guys don't have to memorize this at all. Just go through the logic as you guys are looking through it in the file. Yeah, checks for a duplicate user. Yep. And then otherwise it creates a new user. Excellent. And SQLize adds it to a database. Now, it goes through the model. That means that we have to check the model. Now, this is something that we didn't go over, so I want to go over it now. So let's take a look at the model. So can you guys still see my my computer? Okay. So over here we have this model, and we're utilizing SQLize. So we're saying is there's three different columns that we're going through. So username, email, and password. And we learned about basic validations, which we're going to use right now, which is the validate. So this means that it has to be a minimum of 6 characters, right? And the is email is another validation that's part of SQLize, and that just means that it has to match a basic email format. Now, we had some basic data validation on the client side that handled some of this, but that wasn't, again, really secure, so this adds a little bit more security to it. The password also has to be there, and allow null is set to false. Now, another thing that we've created is we created a hook. So this is a hook is basically something that executes after something happens. So it's like, hey, sorry, well, it's not necessarily true actually. A hook is something attached to something else. So in this case, we're saying before this information is created, execute this function. So what we're going to do is take the password and we're going to encrypt it. So we encrypt this password using this decrypt encryption algorithm. And what that does is allows us to, when we store the information in the database, only that encryption algorithm can, based on the key value pair in the algo library that we use, can decrypt that. So even if I got access to the database, I have no idea what that person's information or their password is because of how the algorithm works. So you might be like, well, can't I just reuse the algorithm and it'll decrypt it? It's like, well, no, in the way that it works, it actually doesn't allow you to do that unless you go through the library to do it. So it's pretty cool. And so what we're going to do is we use this hook, and before the information with this password gets stored, it actually stores it this crazy alphanumeric that looks like gobbledygook. And we're not using this options parameter, by the way. This is just something we passed in, but we're not using. So we just passed it in, but we're not using it. I don't know. I can just remove it. But it's the same thing as like the rec and the res. It just always comes with it. So I'm just used to writing it, but yeah, you can just delete it. So over here we have associations as well. So you don't have to worry about this association yet. But once we get to login, I want you guys to take a look at this and see how that works. So now when we get to the login portion. Now when we get to the second part of the registration. So I think Lynn left off with the registration portion where she said that the model, we use the model to execute a call to add the user to the database. So after that happens, that information comes back to the controller. And we see that over here. And then what's happening next? Correct. SQLize methods are not, well, you can't use it in SQL. I don't know what that means. So over here we have our user.create. So this creates our user. And then what's happening over here? Yes, it's told to redirect unless the user already exists, in which case it sends back an object that says duplicate user true. I send back over here the object redirect. Now, should I think I should have refactored this to both be res.json because res.send wouldn't really make any sense. I'm actually sending a JSON object back. So I think I should refactor this to be res.json. So then on the client side, what is handling this? Well, before it makes a request for that, what is handling this? Status.js logic. So yes, the promise part of the AJAX call. So why don't we go back to the AJAX call? So we'll take a look at that. So it's this over here. And we just say if data.duplicate user, an alert, sorry, that username is in Tycoon. Otherwise, we say window.location equals data.redirect. And that is the information that we got back, which is the path. So this changed the domain path from instead of being at this path over here, it changes it to just the regular path. So now what's, I think someone else mentioned, Hadi mentioned the GET request. So that's correct. It will go to this now. And what handles this is the previous request handler, which is the application controller, which just renders the index.handlebars file. So now why don't we get into the login. So login, for example, I want to log in over here. I'm able to log in and you'll actually see a change in some information over here. Now it says log out. Now let's see what goes into handling that. So this is a little bit more complex. So this is where Passport comes in. So Passport allows us to do some really cool stuff. So why don't we take a look at Passport? We go to, let's see, config. And we go to Passport. Now Passport is being included in our server.js, I believe. So we are including this Passport. So it's one of the first things included. So this does get imported. So we go to config and go to Passport.js over here. And you notice that we're including Passport, and the strategy and the way that Passport works is the way that we handle authentications is all being driven through what are called strategies. Strategies are how you authenticate. In this case, we're using a local strategy. That just means that instead of like Google Auth or something like that, we're just saying, hey, we're using our local authentication. So if we go over here, we also see that we're using Sequelize. So we're requiring these models. And what's happening over here is we're saying passport.use. When we use a new local strategy, we pass in the username field. This is all from Passport. Is going to refer to the username. So when you log in, you're going to pass in the username, password, and then it's going to have a done that's executed at the end. So what happens is we call the model and we say, okay, when you log in, find a user where the login matches the username. If there is no DB user, then return incorrect username. And if the password is not valid, then send incorrect password. Now, this dbuser.valid password is a method from the model. And now we're looking at what's called an instance method. So we're actually, sorry, hold on. This is an instance. No, this is a model. This is a class method. So this is a class method that takes a look at the password and it says, if this password does not match the password inside of the database, then send back incorrect password. So this decrypts the password. So why don't we take a look at that again? So we'll go to model. Model is going to be right here. So valid password. This is a method, and what it does is uses bcrypt, and it's comparing the different things. So it's saying this password that you passed in. Oh, sorry, the password that exists from the database and the password that you passed in. Compare them against each other, and if they don't match, then return incorrect password. However, if both the user and the password match, then return done. So it basically then does a callback, and then it returns the user. So we also have some like serialized users, deserialized users. Don't worry about that too much. But we're basically just passing the login through all of this. So then when we actually do hit the route, so I just want to show you guys some of like this, the passport part, because that's what you guys are going to use for authentication. If you guys are using Node. So why don't we take a look at the route? So this is going to be under users. And we're going to do the login user. So if I go to the route, here we go. So when we go to login, notice that there's a method that's being called between the callback and the route. So this is actually what gets executed before this callback function is executed. So we're saying passport.authenticate local. So that's why we're using this passport part over here. We're saying, okay, execute this passport and then authenticate the local. So this is passing in the username and password to this, because that's what we said is going to get passed in. And it's then returning the user if it's great, if it works out. If it's not, then it's going back to the client and saying, okay, sorry, wrong username, wrong password. So then what happens is we go to userscontroller.login user. So if we go over here, notice that all this is doing is sending back JSON. And in this case, I'm not even doing a redirect. I'm just sending back /, right? Because I don't need any other thing. So now, again, this is a client-side request. So what do you think is handling this return? Yep, the static file. So let's go back to the static file. But in case, in this case, it's going to be the static file for our login. So we go here and we say, this is the thing that made the post for the username password. So this is what was handling that post. And after the data came back, we're just switching up the location again. So it's just going to make a GET request. But you'll also notice that there's some change over here as well. That after we logged in, there's a difference to the same index.handlebars file. So let's take a look at what is doing that, because that's kind of interesting, right? So we go over here. So far up here, it looks like there's nothing, right? There's nothing different, but notice that we do have the nav and we do have the other partial learner. So let's take a look at nav, because it seems like that's where the change is taking place. So we look at nav, it seems normal. So take a look at this. It says if is authenticated, then display this. Otherwise, display this. So what's happening is we're actually sending this object back that is being saved on the client side for authentication. So this is authenticated is actually a check, and that is being used. Here. So what happened is when you logged in through Passport, it actually created what's called a server session. And so when you use Passport, it actually stores the user inside of the request object. So if you have this, the user inside the request object, then what you can do is you can say, okay, well, now I'm authenticated. So this authentication status is actually going to be sent as part of a response to your locals. So I would take a look at what your res.locals means. But basically, this is a global object that gets passed back and it can be checked against. So when you say like is authenticated, it checks against your local variable. And this is basically something that's sent back once your session is started on the server side for your login. And it's pretty complicated, but it's not too bad once you get used to it. So this is basically saying like, okay, I am authenticated, and so I'm sending that information back, and therefore whenever this person is logged in, they are on the client side going to have access to this is authenticated. So when it goes through this and it looks through the locals, it's like, oh, is authenticated. Okay, cool. I have access to that. I can look through it and I can say, okay, well, this person is authenticated. So all I have to do is display this information. Once I log out, Passport takes care of me keeping the session on and off. So when I log out, this authenticated, because it happens every time I make a request, it's going to be either true or false. So if I log out, it's going to be false, and then this is going to be checked and re-rendered. And then it's just going to display this instead. So instead of it showing sign out and my trips, it's going to say login modal. So when I click on log out, which is its own action, and again, I have an event listener that's waiting for that log out. So if I go to where's that static file? Here you go. Next is just part of Node, I believe. It just goes to the next function. Login. Where's logout? Where is logout? Hold on. I forgot what logout is. Oh, here it is. So sign out user. So anytime I click on the logout button, it's then gonna call the sign out user. So this is on the controller. And so when I click on this logout button, it's actually going to this user slash sign out, which then goes to the controller, which then goes to sign out user, calls this rec.logout, which is actually part of, I think it's part of Express actually. And then it redirects to the /. So once this happens, this actually logs me out of the session on my server side. And then my authentication status is now logged out. So that's why when I click here, I now get this. And in handlebars, you can work with it pretty easily because you can just be like, okay, is authenticated, not is authenticated, right? And then you can say like, if they are authenticated, let them see this page. If they're not, then see this. That concept is actually called authorization. Is the way that that users are able to get into an application is called authentication. But if someone is authorized or not to access a page, which is a security issue, that is authorization. All right. So it's about 10 o'clock now. I think I'm exhausted. I'm pretty sure your brains are probably screwed at this point. Um, Hopefully, you guys are able to understand some stuff. There is a little bit more um, because if you guys go to this application and once you log in, you can go to My Trips. This goes to another route, displays a different page, and these are trips. Now, these trips are associated to, yeah, you guys can just go ahead and create accounts. And these trips are associated to users. So that's all through the models. And that's actually not too bad. So every time you make a trip, it's actually associated to individual user. All right. So that's pretty much all I wanted to cover. That covers pretty much model relationships. It covers authentication. It covers static handling. Functionality is not all stored in models. No, the functionality, I mean, so the question is what functionality, right? Before data gets stored into the database, then the models have some methods that handle that. But a lot of the functionality we had was actually on the client side. Any other questions? I'm just waiting a little bit. No worries. All right. Yeah, I'm done too. I'm exhausted. No worries, everyone. Make sure that you guys work hard. This is going to be a grueling 2 months. It's going to be really tough to get your first development job, but make sure that you guys really work hard on project 2, project 3. Really put your best into it. Make sure that you guys are doing a lot of work during the holidays as well, and that you don't get complacent over the holidays. Like take a couple days off, relax, but like really get back in the groove. Otherwise, you could lose that momentum. And you guys only have 2 months left. You guys worked really hard for 4 months. 2 months left of grueling work, and then you can just think about jobs and getting back to the rest of your life. So yes, I will take care of whatever's behind me. I know nothing of this kind of stuff. But I will see you all tomorrow and Tuesday. All right. Take care, everyone. Good night.